these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office. Experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
for insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all. In-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold
these truths. We hold these truths.
With Dan Crenshaw.
The Eagle has landed.
SITREP, episode 2. Again, this is my new gift to my listeners. We will be doing news that you can actually trust. And I'll give you my best take on what's going on inside Congress. This is, of course, in addition to the regular podcasts we will continue to do with our various guests, which I know you all love. Today, we need to talk about the CR, potential government shutdown. That's the drama you've surely seen all over the news lately. So let's unpack that. Let's unpack what a CR even is. Let's unpack the budget process. It's hard to know where to even begin on some of this. First of all, a CR is a continuing resolution. This just means you're continuing the budget that has already been appropriated. Budgets have to be appropriated. Appropriations, it's an important word. It's actually one of the few words regarding a budget that's actually in the Constitution. We have a budget committee, and we have authorizing committees, like my committee, Energy and Commerce. It's an authorizing committee. It oversees the EPA and HHS, things like that. There's the Armed Services Committee. That's an authorizing committee. Every year it passes what's called the National Defense Authorization Act, and we just passed that, actually. But people don't realize sometimes that doesn't mean the military is funded, because the funding always has to come from the Appropriations Committee. And every single year, this becomes a very, very difficult process. Why? Because it requires compromise. And until we have supermajorities in the Congress, which we pretty much never will, guys, it's just the way our electorate is right now, you're going to have to compromise with the other side. It doesn't matter who's president or who's in charge of the Senate or the House. You need 60 votes in the Senate to get these appropriations bills through. That's why everyone always hates them. Every time there's a compromise, especially with a budget, everybody's going to hate it. Everybody's going to find things in there they hate. It's the question on voting for these things always comes down to, is there too much in there that you hate? And that's up to each representative to make their decision on that. Usually what happens is you don't come to any compromise. That's what basically happens every single year. That's why you hear the word CR thrown around all the time, because it's what's necessary to keep the government open, because the Congress couldn't come to a conclusion on what the next year's appropriations would be, that, you know, what new programs would be funded, what old programs would be defunded. And one of the reasons, by the way, that it's always something we don't like is because look, you're negotiating with Democrats. They always want more. When we get more than 60 votes in the Senate and a strong majority in the House, you don't have to negotiate with Democrats. But again, that reality isn't up and coming anytime soon. And so we had a CR that was passed some months ago that lasted until December 18th, which of course requires us to come up with a resolution before that, which is why we're doing it this week. A deal was made between Speaker Johnson, Schumer, essentially the four corners. Am I getting that right? I got my staff here, folks, as usual. So, you know, your four corners of leadership in the Senate and the House, and a deal was struck. And this is the 1,500-page deal that you saw a lot of news about recently. You had many players out there saying it's a bad deal, it's this and that. I want to go through a little bit of what it is now that we've had actually some time to look at it. Now, no, don't get me wrong. There's really not much point in talking about this because it's completely dead on arrival. I never even had a chance to review it before it was dead on arrival. Worth noting, these things are often negotiated in secret. A lot of these big bills often are. Now that frustrates some people. I'll just tell you why it happens that way. If you don't negotiate it in secret, if you don't have a few people in the room that both sides elected to be their leaders, well, then you're going to get a lot of commentary and media hype about things that haven't even been agreed to yet. It'll ultimately destroy any ability to actually negotiate anything, which is why they do it in secret. Now, of course, there's downsides to doing it in secret behind closed doors, because when you finally open that door and you let everyone see it, well, there might have been a lot of preconceived notions. People jump to conclusions. Not a lot of people read this stuff methodically. And I would point out that a lot of times, you can say you read legislation, but depending on the legislation you're reading, you might as well be reading something in French. If you don't speak French, you can read it, you can sound out the words, but you don't know what you're reading, because a lot of this legislation tends to, well, it changes past legislation. It changes current policy. If you're not an expert on what that current policy is, you're not actually sure what's being changed. Sometimes it's very clear. Sometimes it's not. But I would always urge everyone to stop jumping to conclusions before truly understanding what a policy change is and what those trade-offs actually are. So we'll briefly go through what that original deal was. Again, it's dead it's dead now, so it doesn't totally matter. But I'm doing this podcast so that you as the public are just more informed on what's actually happened over the last week. That's the only reason I'm going to tell you about it. It never got a vote, but here's what a lot of the good things that were in it, and we'll talk about some of the bad things that were in it. And all these good things, by the way, are no longer in any deal that we're going to put forward, because what we're going to be putting forward now is what's called a clean CR, which just basically means there's no extra policy riders on it. But the policy riders that were on the original one, there were some that were really, really good and important. One, everyone likes this one, the Pharmacy Benefit Manager Price Transparency Act. That would lower drug prices. It would also take a really, really, let's say a pretty big swipe at the PBMs. If you know anything about healthcare, you know that PBMs make billions and billions of dollars by controlling the drug market. We've done whole podcasts on that in the past. Feel free to look into those. It's a bipartisan effort to force this price transparency against PBMs, and the American public and the American patient loves this. It's gone now. There was $30 billion in aid and disaster aid for farmers, an extension of the Farm Bill through September 2025. To be fair, we're still going to try and do that as we look to vote on this next CR. Farm bills are important. Let's talk about that for a second. In theory, this is something that's authorized every 5 years. And a farm bill is effectively a series of subsidies is one word. It's crop insurance is really what you're talking about. And you need crop insurance for American farmers because American farmers deal in a global market, and it's pretty easy to undercut American farmers if you're from another country because your labor costs are lower and you have no environmental standards. We have an interest. Now, how does our conservative brain figure this out, right? Because I don't like subsidies for industries. And in theory, conservatives should be for more of the free market solution. If you can make it better and stronger, then you should win out. But we also have an interest in America of being able to produce food. I think everybody agrees that's pretty important. And there's a few things I would also add to that. We have an interest in producing food. We have an interest in being able to produce our own energy. We have an interest in being able to produce things like steel, mine for minerals, build ships, build airplanes. There's certain things that if we let the free market completely derail us, we wouldn't be able to build anymore. And that's an interesting discussion by itself, and it needs to be had. Of course, we shouldn't do it for every industry, but there are certain industries, again, like growing food, that are important. That's why this bill is often important, and why we talk about it a lot. One of the reasons it's contentious with Democrats is, one, Democrats tend not to represent districts that are big farming districts, so they know they can leverage Republicans on this bill. And Republicans don't like excessive food stamp benefits, formerly known as SNAP, now known as TANF, right? No, still SNAP.
Those are separate programs.
Sorry,
yeah.
SNAP, still whatever,
Yeah,
food
still
stamps.
SNAP.
Democrats want a ton of food stamp subsidies. Republicans think there should be work requirements, of course. And so that's often where that rub is. In any case, our farmers are really concerned about what's going on right now, needless to say. Disaster relief for Hurricane Helen, Milton, Beryl, that's also in this. But we'll still be in it. But here's some things we lost. Again, the PBM reform. We lost that from the original one. There's another really good policy rider that was in there, which was restrictions on outbound investments into China. This was pretty important. We don't want American companies to keep doing investment, keep helping the Chinese economy along. And there's a lot to dive into here, but I'll just say something real quick. American CEOs will often say, look, we have to make it illegal, otherwise we're going to invest because my competitors are going to invest. That's why you have to have some kind of law like this. And again, I think this is bipartisan effort, but now it's lost because that original CR is gone. There was a lot of other healthcare related issues too that were lost. Colin, what were some of the other healthcare things that we would like that were in that original bill?
Yeah, there were a lot of different expiring programs at the National Institutes of Health related to traumatic brain injury research. There was some legislation related to how we respond to the opioid crisis called the Support Act. These are all relatively non-controversial bills that passed out of the House in a bipartisan way, but ultimately are not gonna make it now.
Worth noting, the Democrats are going to blame us for not getting those through. And, to be fair, it got blown up by, I wouldn't say Republicans in the House, but by kind of, let's say Twitterverse blew it up. But the counter argument to the Democrats here is, why can't we just pass these things anyway? These are bipartisan efforts. We've already passed them, actually. It's the Senate and Chuck Schumer who refused to pass them. So there is a counter argument against Democrats here, who are saying that we're the ones screwing this up, and there were some bad things in that CR. Let me make sure I'm describing this correctly, but it basically removed the pay-go requirements that we would usually have under the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Correct?
Yeah, so it basically, instead of offering spending cuts to zero out the pay-go sequester, which budget sequestration is basically for both mandatory and discretionary spending. If Congress doesn't come up with a given number of cuts, it just does a straight across the board cut. So instead of producing spending cuts, this bill just zeroes that register out, which is not a great policy.
Not ideal. This is what happens when you have a compromise. There's things you like and there's things you don't like. There were some things that people said they didn't like that were just not true. On Twitter, there was said that there was $60 billion in Ukraine aid in this thing. That was never the case. It was said that there was funding for gain of function research. That was not true. It was said that, what was the other big one?
Pay raise.
Well, that was true. People didn't like the pay raise for Congress.
The amount, though.
Yeah. The amount was largely incorrect.
Well, I didn't even see that lie. What was that lie?
That the lie was that Congress was going to get $60,000 additional dollars every year. It was 3.8% of COLA, which over the year amounted to $6,000, so about $500 extra a month, as opposed to $5,000.
And the other big lie told about me specifically was that I was spearheading the effort for a congressional pay raise. And of course, that lie was unfortunately boosted by my friend Elon Musk. And I respectfully said, Elon, please look into the facts before you boost a lie on Twitter. And if you follow me on Twitter, folks, you'll see that I don't take lies very well. I don't take them lying down, and I never will. Come at me with something that is completely untrue, I will hit you back 10 times harder, and I'm happy to do it every single time. No, I did not spearhead any congressional pay raises. It just didn't happen. People like to lie about me because it gets them clicks. That's just the world we live in. I'm going to get myself a T-shirt that says #clickbait. So there was one other big lie about this one.
I think the other one you're thinking of was... What was going around on social media was that the bill protected the J6 committees.
Oh, yeah. That's what it was.
Yeah, because what it did is it updated, it was an internal housekeeping type thing where the Senate has protections on data protection, on their records protection. Right. It was applying to the House, and all that is a checks and balances.
That was just, and it was misconstrued as like somehow some deep, dark way to I guess, protect the January 6th findings. I'm not even sure what the rumor was.
To protect the records of the January 6th committee, even though their records are public.
Everything's public
on the website.
Everything's public about this. The idea that we're even still talking about it is strange, to say the least. But a lot of this stuff wasn't true, and people are like, well, it's 1,500 pages versus, a new one, which is 100 pages. Look what a big accomplishment that is. I would just urge sometimes a lot of pages means a lot of bad things, but not necessarily. If that's your only standard for assessing the merits of a bill, you're not doing a lot of critical analysis. Page numbers aren't necessarily the reason why something is good or bad. Let's just have some intellectual honesty here. So that's what that is. Then again, it's all gone now. It doesn't matter. What I hope that some of our priorities will be things like PBM reform come January. That's going to be really, really important. So what's the state of play right now? The state of play right now, and could change at any second, is that we've been discussing all day in our Republican conference is what the next steps are. What we tried to do last night, I should back up. What we tried to do last night was listen to what President Trump wanted. And we need to spend a moment on this. Sorry, I almost skipped it. President Trump decided, after looking at what the deal was, that what he really wanted was an increase in the debt ceiling. I understand why he wants this. Makes a lot of sense why he wants this, because he doesn't want to have to sign it into law when he's president. He wants to just forgo that. It's always a crappy thing to deal with, the debt ceiling, always. Now, there are some who have the philosophy that we shouldn't even have a debt ceiling marker. It should just, constitutionally, we're allowed to incur debt. Why do we have a debt ceiling that we have to vote on every time? I'm pretty sure that is President Trump's stance, just generally speaking. Now, the counter to that, and what others would say, is the reason we like to have a debt ceiling and the reason we like to have to be able to vote on it is because we can gain leverage and gain spending cuts by agreeing to a debt ceiling. And to be fair, we did exactly that in the Fiscal Responsibility Act under McCarthy's leadership. We had a really great deal, and Democrats got nothing in return. We had a 5-seat majority in the House. We didn't have control of the Senate, and Biden was president, and we completely steamrolled the Democrats. How did we do that? By planning ahead. We had very clear goals. We laid out those goals ahead of time. The goals made sense to the American public. It was things like permitting reform and spending cuts. I mean, it was very sensible. It's a long time ago at this point, so I'm not remembering the details, but it was very sensible and easy to explain stuff, and we won. And Democrats left pissed off. They were like, we didn't get anything out of that. That's how you win. Now, to Trump's defense, the dynamics change when he's president. Now it's the minority that's going to try and push that leverage. So it does make total sense for Trump to want to increase the debt ceiling. And I've said time and time again, I think what we should have done 2 months ago is had a discussion on a plan. You can't have that discussion on the 11th hour. But I and a lot of members would be willing to die on a sword and eat a shit sandwich of a bill, an omnibus spending bill, not even a CR, just an actual spending bill, get it done, along with a debt ceiling increase, make that crappy deal with Democrats, because you know what? It doesn't matter when you make the deal, it doesn't matter when Trump's president, it's always going to be a crappy deal because you have to make a deal. You need the 60 votes. We would have been happy to eat that shit sandwich for Trump so that Trump could have a much cleaner runway as soon as he takes office. Unfortunately, that doesn't appear to be possible at this point because it's something we should have planned on in hindsight. Hopefully we learn that lesson. So obviously, Democrats will not play along with what we did last night, which was a clean CR, the farm bill extension, some aid for farmers, as well as disaster relief. Again, they all agree with that stuff, but we added the debt ceiling increase to that. Democrats had no incentive to play, so it failed. A bunch of Republicans even voted against it, like 38, I think, and Trump was very mad at them. I was not one of them. I voted for it, despite how much I dislike this entire process. So that left us with today's conversation. And today's conversation in conference, and it's an ongoing conversation. As I'm recording this, it's an ongoing conversation on what we're going to do. But we have come to the conclusion that what we are going to do is basically the same bill as last night, which is a clean CR, which means continuing our budget through March 14th, which happens to be my birthday, which just it's a bad omen for me personally. I don't get why that has to be March 14th, but it is. Set that aside for a second. Clean CR, still with the disaster aid for all of these hurricanes that have destroyed a lot of families, and helping our farmers. The Farm Bill extender for 1 year. So that's Be clear, it's a 1-year farm bill extender with some aid in the meantime. That's important for farmers because they've been suffering things like drought and just low commodity prices. So the question is not so much whether that's the right package. That's been agreed to, as I understand it, with conversations between the speaker and Trump. Who now understand, because Trump realizes we're not going to get the debt ceiling increase. Like we don't have the votes, so we're not going to get it. And the question really is, what's the legislative vehicle to get it through? And there's multiple options. You can put all of what I just said into one suspension vote. So now I need to explain to the public what the suspension vote is. A suspension vote just means that we suspend the rules of debate. It's something we get through quickly. And you usually do that, we do it all the time. We do it on things that are largely agreed upon. And they have to be largely agreed upon because a suspension vote means that we need 2/3 of the entire House to actually pass it. So by its very nature, it is very bipartisan and largely agreed upon. We're not sure how Democrats will vote on this particular package. Now, they should vote for it because if they don't, they're shutting down the government. There's nothing in there they should object to. It's a clean CR. It has disaster relief for American people and farm bill extenders. They don't necessarily care so much about, again, for the reasons I stated before, they don't necessarily represent farmers the way Republicans do, but they don't want to be hit hard on this either, especially those who are in tighter districts. So there's one element, there's one theory that they'll actually vote for this. Then there's a question of whether the Senate will vote for it, and we don't know. But we do know that if Chuck Schumer refuses to, it'll be his fault. It'll be his fault. Now, does that make our military families feel better when they miss payments on their mortgage? Whose fault it is? No. But we're just discussing, at least from our end on the Republican side, how we at least do our job, which is get this damn thing done so that you don't shut down the government and don't force, sergeants in the military to miss payments on their mortgage. There's a lot of people who say shut down the government, doesn't matter. It does matter. It does matter to those families. It matters to TSA agents. It matters to a lot of people. They're not bad people. You can't just demonize everyone who works for the government. I'm sorry. And it matters to our military. Like it matters. So not only do our families, American families, get hurt here, especially our military families, there's an argument to be made that it costs the government more money every time we shut down. A lot more, I'm not sure, but the government isn't collecting fees for, say, national parks, for instance. Also, government workers aren't working, but they will get eventually back paid. And so that's the other excuse people use on Twitter, like, wow, who cares? They'll just get back paid. But yeah, I'm telling you, though, there's a lot of families out there, again, especially low-level military members. Yeah, maybe they'll get back paid, but they're missing their mortgage payments. They're missing their credit card payments. Like, have some sympathy for them, guys. And it's an inefficiency because, okay, we're back paying people for work they never did. It's all bad. It all is bad. There's no benefit ever to it. The only benefit I could ever imagine to playing chicken with a government shutdown is if you've got a strong hill to die on and you've made that policy hill very clear from the get-go. Again, the best example of that was what we did with the debt ceiling increase back under McCarthy's leadership called the Fiscal Responsibility Act. We played chicken. We played chicken with the debt ceiling against Biden, and we won. But we only won because we were clear about what our goals were. Now, the other option, if we don't do a suspension vote today, is a three-pronged approach. We do a rules approach, which means we put all three of these we split these bills into three: the Clean CR, Disaster Aid, and the Farm Bill Expender and Aid. 3 different bills, and we put them through Rules Committee. Now there's a question if it even gets through Rules Committee. There's some members on there who might not vote for it, especially given some of the drama in the last couple of days. We won't get into that. But the reason you would do a rules vote is because now you don't need 2/3 of the Congress or of the House to actually get it through. Now you can just do a simple majority. That would be why you do that. There are also just some members who hate the idea of packaging things together. I'm not one of them. I don't see the evil in that necessarily. But some members like that. So, they want to be able to vote against disaster aid or maybe vote against a clean CR, but vote for disaster aid. There's an argument to be made there. we're not sure what we're going to do. As I record this, I don't know what the next step is.
We actually
We got a little bit of an update, not an official window, but we're hearing now that it's going to be basically.
Oh, hold on, let's get in the microphone.
Yeah. So we're hearing now that it's going to be a clean CR plus disaster aid and farm bill extender. So pretty much the bill from last night that failed
And a
on
suspension
suspension.
vote? Okay, so the
minus
first
the
option.
debt ceiling increase.
Okay, so the first option I described, which was my understanding was that makes the most sense. Okay, so now let me explain to the public why that makes the most sense. Because one, we can do it quickly. We can do that within the next hour. We'll know right away if it works or not. We don't know what the votes are going to be. If it fails, then we move on to the rules process option, which will be our only option at that point. And we'll let you know how that goes, guys.